I'll say this for him, he's consistent.
Well, he's been so consistent all year.
Not the taste, consistency.
Consistently, yes.
Consistency!
Thanks, losers.
Hello, everybody. Welcome once again back to the Big Guy Fantasy Sports Fantasy Football Consistency Show. I'm one of your hosts, Bob Lung, here from Big Guy Fantasy Sports with my other good friend and co-host, Ron Rigney, all the way down in Florida, enjoying the warm weather while I continue to watch it snow here on April 9th in Ohio. Thank you very little. How's it going?
That's good. You know, the thing about down here, it's like somebody this time of year hits a switch. It goes from you're 75 and you're comfortable to, I think it was, I don't know if it got to 90 today, but it was pretty damn close to 90 today already. So yeah, I talked to my family in Indiana, and it's snow on the ground, and then I think in 4 days it's supposed to be like 65. So
yeah, no, by Friday it's supposed to be 76.
See, the relief's coming.
The relief's coming. Yeah.
It'll be there. So.
Yeah. Now we'll go through the where you're turning your air conditioning on during the day and then your heat on at night for the next month. That's always fun.
And you have to kind of wear your layers in the morning, and then by 4 o'clock, it's hot outside. So we do that down here from time to time. So
yeah, that's called February for you.
Yeah, it is actually. It is called February. That's exactly right. So
all right. Well,
anyway.
Last week we talked about quarterbacks, and we ran out of time because there's a lot of quarterbacks to talk about, a lot of good quarterbacks, a lot of good values that we didn't even touch on last week, and. So we're heading into this week. We got another full hour's worth. We may actually probably go to a week 3 if we have to. But we're going to go through these quarterbacks so we can really give you guys an idea of the consistency of some of these guys, some of the value that is sitting here, what we're seeing ADP-wise later. Ron, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, so last week, we got through quite a few of these guys, and it's funny how within a week how much the ADP can change for some of these guys. And we kind of talked about before we went on air. The first guy that we're going to lead off with is Jared Goff. And Jared Goff was a guy, we said we're sorting these, with our ADP through the My Fantasy League site. And Jared Goff has risen up a couple spots in direct result of the big trade that happened, I think, like you alluded to, Bob, right after we went off the air the next day. Brandon Cooks ends up being an LA Ram, so it definitely helps him out a little bit. And we talked a little bit about last week too. Are they going to be a power running team, or are they going to throw the ball? So I think this kind of answers our question a little bit. I don't think that they'd spend that price on Cooks if they weren't going to throw a little bit. So what say you about the little jump that our guy Jared Goff here made into the top 10 of our ADP?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly speaks to them wanting to do a little bit more than just rely on Todd Gurley. And as Todd Gurley owners, we're all like, damn, we wanted you to rely on Todd Gurley like you did in weeks 15 and 16 last year, which won most of our fantasy championships for us. But, you got to think of it from a real football standpoint. And from a real football standpoint, this is a great move for the Rams. This team is, if this team doesn't make it to deep into the playoffs, if not the Super Bowl, there's something seriously wrong that's happened to this team. And, this certainly helps Jared Goff. Right now his ADP has jumped up to number quarterback 8, pick 72. So you're looking at somewhere in the, 7th round-ish. And that's respectable. Again, I still feel like I need another year out of this guy, to really prove to me that he's going to be fantasy worthy beyond the 50-60% consistency, especially when there's guys after him that have proven they can be in the 75-plus range. I like Goff, and I think he's going to be a good player, but I'm just not sure that I'm going to take him before I'm going to take a Kirk Cousins or, a Brady or a Matt Ryan or somebody like that would be a round or two later. So right now, I like Goff, and I like him a little bit more than I did last week because of Cooks. That's going to certainly help the team. But I think it's also going to help out Gurley even more because now you have a new legitimate deep threat that they lost when they lost Sammy Watkins to free agency. They've got Cooks back, and Robert Woods is no slouch either when it comes to deep threat. So, those kind of guys are going to spread that field out for Gurley, etc. And I think that's going to really help him and Jared Goff. But I'm still not sure that Jared Goff is going to take a jump from 50% to 75% consistency, which is what I'd really like to get out of my quarterback, depending on the value in the ADP he's going to be at.
And I'm looking at Brandon Cook's game logs from last year right now. And so while I like that move, I kind of agree with you, Seth, as well. I wonder if that's going to be more of an impactful move for Brandon Cooks or the guys that he's joining. Is it going to have a bigger impact on Robert Woods? Is it going to have a bigger impact on a guy that, from a rookie standpoint, who had a solid year last year in Cooper Kupp? So, right. When you look at his game logs from last year, there was never a week that he had above 6 catches, and there was only 200-yard games in there. Now, he had some weeks where he contributed with some touchdowns, but it'll kind of be interesting to see, what he's able to do. But then again, though, New England spreads the ball around, right, between running backs or wide receivers or tight ends or whoever it may be. It's kind of that, they always have that next man up scenario. So we'll see how that goes. But like I said, I do think that with the price that they paid, they're definitely going to try to get the guy the ball, but I think it could open up some lanes for Gurley and open up some opportunities for Woods and Kupp as well.
Yeah, if you look at the wide receiver scenario for the Rams last year, Robert Woods, missed 4 games, but was 67% consistent in the games he played. And then I lost track. Cooper Kupp was 60% consistent, 25th in total fantasy points. And Sammy Watkins was 40th, but 53% consistency, missed 1 game. That shows me that team pretty much spread the ball out very nicely. Brandon Cooks, basically in my mind, takes Sammy Watkins' spot. Do I see him doing better than Watkins? Sure. I can see him moving up in that maybe 60% range. But, remember, Brandon Cooks was only 63% consistent with Tom Brady at the helm and was 15th in total points. My thought is, I think that's pretty much where I could see Brandon Cooks falling again, both total points wise and consistency wise. I don't. So from that standpoint, I don't see a lot of change in Cooks from a fantasy standpoint, and therefore I don't know again if I see Goff really changing that much at this point. But we'll see what happens come preseason, see what we see in maybe some of those games. But again, I think I'm still a little leery for picking him as the 8th quarterback off the board.
Yeah, I agree. And one of the things that we're going to keep going through here, and we're probably going to use this word value over and over and over when you look at these scenarios, especially when we get towards the end here, because when I look at these ADPs and I look at some of the guys that are kind of in this range, I'm very, very comfortable waiting until we get to a little bit further down the list. And so next guy that we have up here, he's a guy that he seemed like he rose a little bit as well. A couple of guys that we talked about last week, and Matt Stafford and Kirk Cousins have dipped just a little bit. And so next guy on our list is Marcus Mariota. And for me personally, Marcus Mariota is a guy that I'm kind of lukewarm on because I don't know necessarily when I look at the roster that Tennessee has. I like some of the weapons that he has at his disposal. I just don't know if he has enough weapons at his disposal. So when I look at the guys he's throwing to me, what kind of is going to make or break Marcus Mariota is going to be what Corey Davis does. I saw some flashes of him later in the year, some catches that he made that I thought were really impressive. But it's just it goes into that. He was a rookie last year, so that's part of it. But it'll be interesting to see if he can get a full off season and a full preseason under his belt as far as healthy, what he can do for Marcus Mariota. So what do you think about Marcus Mariota here as our? Let's see, where's he ranking here as our ADP number 9 guy off the board?
Number 9 guy and only 5 spots behind Goff. Again, 2 years ago, Mariota, well, first off, his rookie year, he's one of the rare quarterbacks that was over 60% consistent in his rookie season. The next season, he bumped up a little bit to like 67%. And, I was really kind of high on him, thinking that he was going to take the next step. And he fell apart, and the whole Tennessee Titans team fell apart. The running game never really got going. Murray had a couple big games occasionally, so did Henry, but they lost Corey Davis. They were relying on Rashard Matthews. There was just I hate to say this. No, I will say this. There was no consistency on that offense. There. But the only guy you could count on in that offense was basically Delaney Walker, who was always consistent. We love him as the tight end. I think this is almost like a rebuilt team. They brought in Dion Lewis, which is going to be a hopeful to kind of offset Derrick Henry because now DeMarco Murray is gone. Like you said, Rashard Matthews is there. He's going to be pretty much the guy that Mariota is going to rely on as he has in the past. I think Rashard Matthews will be a really good wide receiver value because not a lot of people will remember that 2 years ago when Mariota was clicking and was having a decent fantasy season, Rashard Matthews was also having a very good fantasy season. But like you said, after that, after Corey Davis, if he can stay healthy all year, you've got Taywan Taylor, Tajay Sharp. There's not a lot of oomph there at their third receiver. So unless they pick up somebody in the offseason or they get somebody through the draft again, I think Mariota still is going to be struggling to be a consistent quarterback unless his legs get him a lot of fantasy points. But the problem with that is when he starts doing that, that's when he gets hurt. And so that's always troublesome to see him running around too much. But at this point, I think I'm still a little bit leery of taking a shot with him that early.
I will say I do like the protection they have in front of him, though, especially the tackles. That's probably the two best tackles, 1-2 in the league with Jack Conklin and Taylor Lewan. They did a really nice job of putting those bookends around him. The one thing too is, I know we're not talking about wide receivers here, but you mentioned Rashard Matthews. As far as looking at their depth chart, to me, NFL-wise, it looks like they have a bunch of wide receiver twos on there. Now, I will say, though, from a fantasy standpoint, Rashard Matthews is one of my favorites to get some nice value in a PPR scenario. Mm-hmm. Get some sneaky catches in there. I don't like him as much in a standard, but you could do a little bit worse in a standard as well. But if I can grab him at a PPR for where I'm going to get him at, I'll take 50 catches, 4 touchdowns, 800 yards, kind of like he put up last year. So I don't think he's all bad at the wide receiver spot. And so when we move down a little bit further here, we like we said, a couple of our guys slid down a little bit, and so we'll skip down to a guy that we mentioned before, and he was put up some sneaky consistency numbers last year, and that's our guy Jameis Winston. And Jameis Winston is sitting right now as the 96th overall off the board. He's all the way down at our 14th quarterback off the board here, and we alluded to the fact that we talked a little bit about some of the weapons they added around him. With the running back spot's a little shaky, but overall, as far as the guys he has to throw to, there's tons of options there. So, and actually now that I look at it, I skipped our boy Dak Prescott, but that's okay. We'll just go out of order a little bit here. So, we'll talk about Jameis Winston here at 14. What do you think as far as first of all, my question is, how do you think the running back scenario is going to impact him?
Well, they really didn't have much of a running game last year, and that's when he really did pick it up and actually had his best season from a consistency standpoint. I mean, going into this past year, I wouldn't have never even talked about in any kind of positive manner towards Jameis Winston in that game, in that passing game. But, this past year with their defense not being very good, their running game not being very good, Winston had to do a lot on his own. Now the problem with that is he missed 3 games, so his total points was only 18th in consistency. But on the positive side, he was 9 out of 13, so for 69%, ended the year ranked as the 6th highest quarterback consistency wise. More importantly, 5 straight clutch games at the end of the year last year. And he was the only quarterback to earn 5 straight at the end of the year. That tells me that maybe are kind of looking up for Winston. He's still got to stay healthy. The guys around him have to stay healthy. If they can get a decent running back in the draft to just take a little bit of pressure. I mean, Peyton Barber did okay at times, but he wasn't that great. But if they can get maybe a decent rookie, maybe a Nick Chubb later in the draft that can just kind of fill a role and be a decent back, I think that'll help Winston a little bit, not to have to rely on throwing as much. But that defense hasn't changed that much. I think they're still going to be bad. So my thought is Winston looks like he'd be a really good value. And like you said, sitting at pick 96 ADP-wise, again, if you want to wait that long and get somebody and maybe take a shot with him as your starter, I don't see a problem with that. Or maybe he becomes your backup. Maybe you draft somebody, like Russell Wilson early or, Rodgers early and get Winston as your backup. And if Winston starts off hot, Looks like he's going to keep that consistency. You trade Rodgers off for a stud somewhere else, or you trade Winston off, one of the two. But I really like Winston going into this year as a great value, as a later round quarterback pick.
And to kind of piggyback off of the lack of running backs here, and we just talked with the Titans about one of the concerns with Marcus Mariota is the depth of wide receiver. To me, when I look at Tampa Bay's wide receiver depth, they're at least 4 deep of guys that I think, a couple guys there that they're 3 and 4 in PPR leagues later on. It might be some nice value. Of course, Deshaun Jackson, Mike Evans, we talk about him. They have Adam Humphries in there, but a guy that I like is kind of a deeper sleeper headed into the year's Chris Godwin. He's another guy kind of like Corey Davis last year that showed a few flashes here and there. So, it'd be interesting to see what he can do. But looking at the value that Winston gives you, when we look at this ADP, and we'll talk about this guy later on, I'm looking at a scenario here where I wouldn't mind getting Winston and maybe Phillip Rivers if they have a different bye week and kind of alternating those guys. I think that can give you some pretty nice quarterback one numbers if you can pick the right matchups in between there. So
yeah, if you want to try the streaming concept, which I've heard people, I've never done it myself, but I've heard people do it. I mean, if you can successfully pull that off, I mean, certainly guys like that would be 2 great combinations to have. And just like you said, kind of play them when the matchups, work in their favor, and take it from there.
Be interesting too. I'm going to maybe do this as soon as we get off here. I'm going to see. I'm already starting to kind of formulate a draft plan here. I'm going to look at their schedules and kind of see how they mesh together and see what
I don't think the schedules are out yet.
No, they're not. Oh,
no.
Weeks aren't just the teams.
Yeah, just teams.
Okay. All right. Well, that kind of foils that then.
Usually they do that right about draft time, either right after or right before.
Oh, you know what? That's right. Because I saw a thing, and I think it was on Colts Twitter, that you can take and you can guess what weeks they play whoever, and you can win season tickets. I think so. Nice. I don't think.
And is second prize then 4 season tickets?
Well, I was going to say they're probably giving those away like in Cracker Jack boxes anyway, so it's not really like they're going to be that hard to come by.
Nice.
So anyway, I think that one of the reasons, and as I was looking at the ADP here, I think that one of the reasons that I skipped right over Dak Prescott is because I really don't like him all that much heading into this season. So maybe that was just kind of my own mind just kind of subliminally showing my displeasure for him heading into the year. So skipped over him, but we'll go back and we'll touch on him a little bit. At number 12 quarterback here at 91 overall off the board, and the thing that surrounds him is once again, kind of the Mariota thing. I've read a couple things about, is Dez going to be back? Is Dez not going to be back? And I read kind of an interesting thing. I can't remember where I read it today, but it was something that mentioned how, if you have a diva wide receiver that talks a little bit of smack and, is kind of a not necessarily a troublemaker off the field, but just kind of makes it all about him, and he's putting up production on the board, you kind of ignore it. But when your diva wide receiver starts slipping a little bit and loses a step and is dropping passes, you may not be so quick to ignore it. You might just get rid of the problem. And so I'm afraid that might be what happens to our guy Dez here. But let's speak to a little bit. Do you think that Dak is fairly valued here as the 12th guy off the board in our ADP?
Dak again, kind of like Mariota. He came into the league kind of as a backup to Tony Romo. Didn't know when he'd get in there. Not a lot of people, guys who follow college obviously knew who he was, but he certainly wasn't a first round top pick. He was forced into the job when Romo gets hurt, puts up 75% consistency in his rookie season, and just took the world by storm. Last year, he actually started off fairly well. In fact, he started off with 6 straight clutch games. And, in fact, if you take week 8, he actually went 8 out of his first 9 weeks. And it looked like Dak Prescott was well on to another 75% plus season. Then the suspension finally came down for Mr. Ezekiel Elliott. From that point on, he went 1 for 7. But even when Ezekiel came back, Dak really didn't put up any clutch games, mostly because, like you said, Dez really wasn't pulling his weight, and the team was pretty much out of the playoffs, and it just was a mess. So, part of me looks at it and go, well, Dez really didn't play that well early on either. He just kind of had a bad year. So could he still be productive as long as Ezekiel Elliott's on the field, regardless of the wide receivers? And my guess, I would say yes. But will I pick him as the 12th quarterback off the board, 91? I don't think it's terrible. But again, if I'm looking at value, and I could take maybe, I don't know, somebody else like you said, Brady or Breeze or somebody like that, or Kirk Cousins, who's only 2 spots ahead of him, probably going to take those guys before I'm going to take Dak. I think Dak's going to fall, especially if Dez goes away. I think Dak's going to fall out of the QB1 ADP-wise. I think so. Then, now you might be able to get him as a backup. Then I think there's some value there, because if he does, if they do get some decent receivers, whether it's through the draft or free agency, and replace Dez, then, I think that there's some possibility of having some great value.
Yeah, and even if Dez doesn't come back, we're looking at these in April too. So I think once after the draft goes through and after we start getting into draft season, I think you're going to see some guys rise up this board quite a bit. But I don't think Dak is going to be one of those guys. And when I look at the depth chart here, as far as who he's going to be throwing to, I like some of these guys here. But to me, you have Dez out of here. None of these guys that are left over are wide receiver ones. You got some 2s and 3s here. Allen Hurns, I like the signing. But Allen Hurns is not a wide receiver one, I don't believe. He did have a nice season a couple of years ago with Allen Robinson opposite him. But when Terrence Williams or Cole Beasley are not Allen Robinson, and so I don't think obviously you're going to get that kind of production there either. So, does help him though that he has a guy like Ezekiel Elliott to hand the ball off. So we'll see.
And surprisingly, but still a very talented tight end. He'll still have Jason Witten, and I could see Witten being more involved, maybe in the passing game, if Dez goes away and they're left with basically Beasley, Hurns, and Williams.
Okay, so next up, I'll try to stick to the order here a little bit more strictly here. So next guy we have is one of the more intriguing ones to me, and we kind of touched on this a little bit last week, was Derek Carr. And Derek Carr is a guy to me that it's not necessarily even the guys he's going to be throwing to, the supporting cast that they have around him. We all know that Mike Crabtree is out. We know that Jordy Nelson is in. We know that Doug Martin was kind of brought into the fold along, with Marshawn Lynch that is there. And so it'll be kind of interesting to see how John Gruden juggles all this. But what I'm more interested in seeing is we know, John Gruden is a pretty smart guy, and he expects his quarterbacks to kind of get things on the same level that he does. And I don't know if that's always going to be the case because he's been out of it for a little while. And so the thing I'm most interested to see with Derek Carr is how he kind of meshes with John Gruden and how all these new pieces kind of fit together in their offense. So let's see what we got here. Derek Carr sitting there at our 15th quarterback off the board at around pick 110. I don't think that that's really all that out of the ordinary for him to be at 110. What do you think, Bob?
I mean, when you think about it, that literally just 2 years ago we were talking about him becoming the MVP for that year until he has an injury and goes down, and the Raiders kind of fell apart from them. Last year it was a hot mess between his back problems and wide receiver drops, and then into infighting with Crabtree and some of the people. In the sad part, as much as I love John Gruden as a human being, as an announcer, and as a Raiders fan, I honestly was not excited about him getting picked up by the Raiders. I think that he's out of it. And to me, it already shows that he went after Jordy Nelson and Doug Martin. I mean, that was great 10 years ago, but these guys are old, and Crabtree was the best receiver for the 2 straight years, and you got rid of him, let him walk, and he went to the Ravens for like peanuts. So I'm really worried about this team. I probably will do everything humanly possible not to draft Derek Carr. I don't care where he's sitting in the draft. I just feel like I just don't think he's healthy. I think this team is going to be a hot mess. I'm just worried about it. You saw what Lynch did a few times last year when he kind of got to be a head case. Like I said, I'm really worried. I really want nothing to do with this scenario. I don't want Amari Cooper. I don't want Marshawn Lynch. I don't want anybody from the Raiders. I think it's going to be a hot mess.
It will be fun to watch.
Oh
though.
yeah,
It's
it'll
one
be
of those-
great.
It's
It'll
going to be like
reality TV.
Yeah, it's going to be a train wreck.
They really should do Hard Knocks for those guys.
That would be good. That would be good. Have they said who they're going to do Hard Knocks with
I
yet?
don't know, but that would be the best ever.
Because Gruden
alone will be hilarious.
Exactly what I was going to say. He's entertaining no matter what he does.
Oh, I know he's entertaining.
Yeah.
When this year at Hall of Fame, when he was there, we pulled up in a car, and he was sitting in another car right across from me. And I rolled my window down, and I yelled, "John Gruden!" He's like, "Hey, buddy, how you doing?" And he was hammered, and he's just like,
Awesome.
"Man, thanks for coming out. It's good to see you." And I'm like, "I'm working. I live here." But he thanked me for being there.
That's something. That's something.
Yeah, it was cool. But
And by the way, too, if you don't follow on Twitter, one of the best follows I have on Twitter and on Facebook is faux John Gruden.
Oh god,
like fake John Gruden.
I know. I have faux John Madden, which is hilarious too.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
But I never thought about Gruden, so I'll have to follow him.
It's quality. It's not. Yeah, it's not as much obviously because football season's not in. But once training camp starts, it's going to be. I'm sure it's going to be pure gold. So definitely to follow.
Yeah, well.
All right. So next up, a guy that I'm kind of surprised to see where he's at, but like I said, we're doing this fairly early, and I think once we kind of get in the swing of things here, and all the dust kind of settles after the draft, and you have guys kind of settle into spots, you'll see this guy shoot up the boards just on name value alone, and that's our guy, terrific Tom Brady, sitting here at number 16, pick 113 overall, and we just kind of alluded to the fact that Brandon Cooks is out of town. Went to the West Coast, went to L.A., get a pretty good return for the Patriots there, and so the rumors that have been kind of swirling around is that was in preparation to maybe land an Odell Beckham Jr. So I don't know. Number one, I don't know how I feel about that fit, but number two, it just seems kind of like a Patriots move, because one of the things that I do like that the Patriots do, and I don't know why more teams don't do this, is if you're in a position where you're very close like the Patriots, I feel like some of these teams value picks. Not to say picks aren't important, but I think they value them a little more than they should, as far as if you can flip those picks into maybe getting you a serviceable starter, not maybe superstar level, but a guy that is going to be a cornerstone of what you're going to build around for a few seasons. And I like that the Patriots have no problem doing that, or trading back to get picks, or acquiring a mass quantity of picks to look at things for next year. And that's one of the things that I like that they do. So, like I said, sitting here at number 16, 113 overall, how do you think? Well, first of all, you think Odell Beckham is going to go to New England?
I do not. I just don't think it'd be a good fit. That team doesn't, even with Tom Brady there, and as big as a celebrity as Tom Brady is, you don't see Tom Brady, telling people what to do. I mean, you might see him having arguments with players on the sideline, but it's more because they probably didn't do their job than anything. But to have a guy like OBJ come in there with his attitude, and if he doesn't get thrown the ball enough, and I just see that as a bad chemistry that usually Patriots don't mess with. They did have Randy Moss at one point, but Randy Moss kept his mouth shut and played great. And maybe that will happen with Beckham. I don't know. But they certainly set themselves up for that. But then they went out and got Jordan Matthews, who isn't a bad speed guy to help on the outside. Edelman will be back. Hogan's still there. Allegedly Gronkowski will stay. Burkhead, James White. So, I mean, you got most of the offense. Cooks was a good guy, a good player for that team, but he wasn't Randy Moss-esque from years back when he broke all the records. So I think they might be okay with where they're at. I don't know what they'll use the picks for, unless they decide to go get a quarterback, trade up and get the future for Tom Brady, which is a possibility. But again, Patriots always are very good at shocking people. They'll drop players and bench their starting quarterback in the Super Bowl. They're just known for, you do it our way or it's a highway, and I just don't see Beckham fitting into that scenario at all. But, Brady sitting at the spot, he'll be in the top 12 before the season, the draft start rolling. Him sitting at 16 is almost silly. He'll be in the top 10 probably for sure when it comes draft time.
Well, and one of the things I said earlier about Brandon Cooks was looking at his game log. You get a guy in there like Odell Beckham Jr. and you have him in the scenario that the Patriots run where they're spreading the ball to everybody. Odell Beckham Jr. is not going to be okay with having weeks where he has 3 catches, 2 catches, 3 catches. So he's going to start jawing. He's going to speak his mind, and I don't think that's going to mesh real well with Bill Belichick. No. I wouldn't quite rule it out as being a move, but I kind of forgot about Jordan Matthews. That was kind of the forgotten move of the week that I actually do like that move quite a bit for them, more so from a real life standpoint. I don't know necessarily if I target him in a fantasy draft as any of my wide receivers due to the fact that they spread the ball around. I think there's a couple guys there that I would take over him that are Patriots, but still a nice move. But I don't think that really needs to be done now that they got a guy like Jordan Matthews. So, all right, moving down the list here, another guy that's probably going to shoot up, name value, not used to seeing him in this 15 to 20 range that we're getting to in our ADP here, and that's Drew Brees. Guy that was a free agent for about a half a second, and I don't think it was really a question of he's going anywhere. I think he's obviously going to retire as a Saint. That was a pretty solid move for them back in the day. That the Dolphins really kind of whiffed on that. Imagine that, the Dolphins whiffing on a personnel move, but it's worked out pretty well for Drew Brees. Dolphins not so much. They're still trying to find their guy, and so we got Drew Brees sitting here at pick 122 overall, 17th quarterback off the board, a guy that I think is going to shoot up quite a bit. So what are we expecting out of Drew Brees coming up?
Well, the reason he has fallen is because his consistency last year of 50% was probably his lowest in I can't remember how long since he's been that low when he was healthy anyway. He was 10th in total points, so certainly respectable from that standpoint, but the 50% consistency came from the fact that they got a running game and a defense. He didn't have to throw the ball. When he did need to, he did, and they won more football games. I don't see that changing because nothing has changed on that offense. If anything, they did add, some players, but nothing that's really going to, make that big of a difference, for the team. I mean, they picked up Ben Watson back. Because Kobe Fleener's injured. But, Michael Thomas, I think that the thing that's probably most concerning is that there's really not a solid, second receiver there, but it didn't seem to stop Michael Thomas last year. They used Ginn as the deep threat. Willie Snead's kind of the under guy. I would rather have Brees as my backup, and I have no problem if I had to pick him, but do I want a starter that's going to give me 50%, whether his name is Drew Brees or not? And I just don't know if I can do that. Would I like to have Brees as a backup? Yeah, and maybe at pick 113, that's where I'll get him, or 122. That's fine. But I don't know if I can draft him as a starter at this point because I just feel like nothing has changed, and I feel like he's going to be 50% consistent and be a good NFL quarterback, but not a great fantasy quarterback. And I as much as I love Brees and have always drafted Brees in the past, I just don't know if I'm going to pull the trigger on him this year.
Well, and the thing about Drew Brees that always stands out to me, too, is just the home-road splits. Mm-hmm. He's obviously a different guy at home than he is on the road. So it's just kind of like, in baseball when you draft a pitcher that's really good at home. John Gray is a guy for our baseball people that comes to mind that has excellent road splits, but he pitches his home games at Coors. And so he's going to strike you out some guys, but he's also going to give up some bombs. And so is it worth drafting a guy where you can only really realistically expect decent stats out of him in half of his games? So he and as I bring him up here, he was a little bit better last year as far as yards per game. When we look at the home road splits there, the rating was about 10 points difference. So over the course of his career, when I scroll down a little bit further, so needless to say, I'm kind of with you on that. I don't think I definitely won't be drafting him as a starter unless I way far down on the list in quarterback. But then again, like I said before, we've got some guys even further down on this list that I would probably consider taking above Drew Brees there. And Phil Rivers, I'm looking at you. So,
well, and another thing you mentioned earlier too, which may be a good spot for Brees, is to use him as a streaming option, as you mentioned.
Yeah, and that's like I said, that's one of the first things that I always do every year is when the schedules come out. Is I don't have very many redraft leagues where I'm picking fresh, but one of the things that I try to do in the few that I do participate in is I have to kind of weigh the size of the league. I have to kind of weigh what I think people are going to do at the top, and it seems like a lot of these leagues that I play in, guys like Aaron Rodgers, Carson Wentz. I think Deshaun Watson will be, everybody will be all aboard the hype train in there, and they'll be picking him early. And so I'll be glad to load up on running backs and receivers in those first few rounds and go later on and get the guys like Winston and Breeze and Rivers and kind of flip back and forth. I've had some pretty good success with that, especially in I would think it'd be the other way around, but especially in smaller leagues, I've had some pretty good success with that as well. Being able to flip
like a
guys.
10-team,
so,
sure.
Yeah, so and it's funny too when you get used to doing these bigger leagues and you go back to doing those smaller drafts. I get reminded of this in baseball every year when I go back from some of the 19 and 15 team leagues I do. If you do a 10-team draft, it's like you got an all-star team at the end, and it's kind of the same thing when you do an 8-team football draft or 10-team football draft. It's like you look at it at the end, and everybody likes their draft when it's over with, and they're going to take it all the way. But when you do it in an 8 or 10 team, man, it's like you got a Pro Bowl roster on your hands, and it's definitely a whole different ball game. But if you can do it in those smaller leagues, I always try to capitalize on that.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So next guy we got here, it's a guy that another one of these guys that I'm kind of lukewarm on, and I never know what I'm going to get out of Matt Ryan, which Matt Ryan I'm going to get. So I always kind of steer clear of him. But he's the next guy we got sitting on our list, just about a spot behind Drew Brees at pick 123, the 18th quarterback overall off the board. And so one of the things that you look with Matt Ryan is he's got one of the best in the game to do it in Julio Jones, and the guy's a warrior. The guy goes out there every week in and week out, and does it right. He lost a couple weapons there. A couple guys that have jetted on old Matt Ryan there. What do you think about him? You think that he's going to kind of stay put where he's at? You think he's going to move up? Where's he going to be sitting when we get closer to draft day?
I don't know if he'll move up. Well, he'll just like Breeze and Brady. He'll move up due to name recognition. 2 years ago, he was the fantasy MVP at quarterback. He was, 85% consistent, 90% consistent that year. He had an incredible year, like 14 out of 16. But that was when Shanahan was the coach, or not the coach, the OC. And, they spread the ball around. That year, while Matt Ryan was extremely consistent and they went all the way to the Super Bowl, Julio Jones had his worst year ever as a fantasy wide receiver. His consistency was like 65%. And the funny thing was, in the book and in his last offseason when we were talking about these kind of players, I said with Shanahan gone, the new OC coming in, which I didn't know much about, but the fact that Shanahan was gone, I said, will they go back to making sure Julio gets the ball, which makes him consistent, but Ryan inconsistent, or will they keep the same concept that was successful the year before? Well, we all know the answer now. They switched back to the old concept of throwing the ball to Julio all the time, making him super consistent, and Ryan was back to his usual 50%, 8 of 6, 14th in total points, and, he's a yawner now. I mean, the Falcons won because they have a good running game, decent defense, Mohamed Sanu there. I mean, they have a good team around Ryan, but he's never consistent when he's when he's throwing the ball that much to, Julio Jones. And, they just did, a very poor job, and the Falcons didn't have a very good season. And so, we don't know what to expect. I think Sarkisian is how you pronounce it. He's still there.
Sarkisian,
yeah. Sorry. So Sarkisian's still there, so we assume nothing's going to change. So, yeah, Matt Ryan, to me, is kind of a yawner. And he doesn't have the splits like a Breeze. I don't remember him having, but I'm going to check while we're talking. Well, actually, amazingly enough, he actually does really well on the road. He's 75% consistent on the road, 56% consistent at home. I think more often than not, they seem to play better at home. With the running game seems to click better at home. He doesn't need to throw as much. So, he's does really well on the road. So, again, maybe from a streaming standpoint, you get Breeze for the home games, Ryan for the away games, and you're rolling through the season.
I was going to say we've just solved everyone's quarterback problem.
Yeah, draft them both and then play Breeze when he's at home, and hope they don't play They don't play home and away at the same time.
Yeah, that's pretty easy. Let's see. So Matt Ryan, like I said, kind of a meh guy. I definitely like in that offense. I definitely like Devonta Freeman more than him. I definitely like Julio Jones more than him. Mohamed Sanu's a guy that maybe later on, depending on the size of the league, I might take a flyer on, but I don't know if he's all that useful in a lot of formats. So, Matt Ryan, I think I'm going to leave Matt Ryan on the board there for somebody else to take and be their streaming guy there. Let's see, where does that bring us? That brings us next up, and like I said, we're kind of skipping over a few guys here because there's a couple guys in this list that are kind of head scratchers to me. I think you kind of felt the same way when we were talking about them before we came on here, and so we're going to skip about the next four due to them being rookies or due to the fact that we don't really know what we're going to get out of them. Next guy that is always one of my favorites, always one of my favorite streaming options, and that's Phillip Rivers, guy that I had last year that I actually streamed him with Kirk Cousins, different points in the year, and it worked out fairly well at the quarterback spot in one of my smaller leagues here. And so one of the things, and we talked about this in the quarterback episode, or the quarterback awards, we talked about it in the wide receiver awards. I love Phillip Rivers, but as Phillip Rivers goes, his production is tied very heavily to Keenan Allen. And not to say that they don't have a few guys at wide receiver that are talented, but Keenan Allen is definitely the guy that he looks for. He's definitely the guy that leads them in targets. I mean, he puts up monster numbers when he's healthy. It's just the fact that he's got to stay healthy, and so he was able to do that last year. Really helped out Phil Rivers, and I think Phil Rivers is a guy that when we look at him from a consistency standpoint, he's been one of these guys that he's given you pretty steady production throughout his career. He finished 7 total points overall, 56% clutch. So I'd like to see a little higher clutch rating than that. But nonetheless, when you think you're streaming him, I had those two guys right there, back to back in our ratings there, Kirk Cousins, Phillip Rivers. If you can get those guys and kind of play the matchups correctly, you put those numbers together, you've got some pretty solid QB1 numbers. So I don't know how you feel. I think you kind of feel the same way, that we're going to see Phillip Rivers shoot up the board a little bit.
I think he will some. I mean, again, he's kind of like Ryan. He's always in the top 10 in total points, but his consistency never seems to get over 60%. In fact, I don't think I've ever remember him over 60%, which, like you said, you kind of have to then play the matchups. Now, last year, he was 75% consistent at home, 38% on the road. So he's definitely got some home cooking. Like you said, having Keenan Allen for the whole year was huge. 2 years ago when Keenan missed most of the season, I think Rivers was around the 38th percentile. So, he definitely has to have Keenan there. They'll get Mike Williams back healthy. So maybe they can put some offense together. Obviously, having Melvin Gordon there has helped tremendously to keep the pressure off Rivers, because Rivers, when he does get some pressure on him, really falls apart. And that's usually what kills Rivers. Is he'll throw for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns, but he'll also have 4 interceptions. That's usually what kills his fantasy points, which usually knocks him down from a consistency standpoint. But like you said, he was 12th last year, or tied for 11th actually with 56%. Quarterbacks last year were really poor consistency-wise. I think Rivers is a great streaming option, like you said. Maybe we just call it the old folk home streaming option at quarterback. We'll get Rivers and Breeze and Brady, and we'll just stream all of the senior citizens every week, and might have a fantastic quarterback scenario. But
we can call that our AARP group, I guess.
Yeah, we'll call it the ARP streaming method. We might have to get some permission from ARP on that, but I'm an ARP card carrier, so I think I should at least have first option.
There you go. I'm good with that. So let's see what we got else here. Down the list a little bit more. A guy that he's another one that I don't know. He started out really slowly last year, came on as the season went on very steadily, and he's another guy too. We've talked about a couple guys here in order that have one receiver that they really rely heavily on. We talked about Matt Ryan and Julio Jones. We talked about Phillip Rivers and Keenan Allen. Next guy we got on the board here, sitting as our 150th pick off the board, way down in the 20s here, is Ben Roethlisberger, a guy that at one point was kind of contemplating retirement, definitely didn't go that route, going to come back for at least one more year. But when you have the complement of weapons he has around him, with obviously Antonio Brown, perennial first round pick, PPR gold just about every year. You've got Juju Smith-Schuster coming on. You've got, guys in the backfield. Le'Veon Bell's one of the best to do it. He's going to be back at least another year. So Big Ben's definitely got the complement of weapons around him. But I still, even in fantasy, from that standpoint, looking at all the things that he has, pair that with his 67% clutch rating last year, I still have a little bit of pause when it comes to drafting Ben Roethlisberger. So are you taking Ben Roethlisberger? Are you going to leave him on the board? What are you doing with him?
Well, that's a good point, and I've been kind of looking at this and kicking it around because, one of the things that surprised me last year was how Ben started off so poorly. He was only 3 out of his first 8 games, and I think maybe that was when he was kind of contemplating, the whole scenario of retirement. But then he goes out and over the last 8 games of the year, he puts up 7 clutch games. So he finishes the year 10 of 15, which ranked him 7th in consistency. He was 9th in total points. And I'm sitting there going, why did that happen? And I'm thinking the reason is that Steelers defense, which used to be pretty good, is not anymore. And I feel like a lot of those games in the second half of the year, they were really struggling to keep up with teams because of the defense. And, they lost Shazier to an injury, but I think that was later in the year. I think that was more like November, December, so it wasn't certainly that. But, that defense is not the Steelers of old. It's not your dad's Steelers. So from that standpoint, I have to wonder if maybe Roethlisberger, for the first time ever, for me, might look at Roethlisberger kind of looking at like Jameis Winston, like, you know what? Maybe that isn't all of a bad idea to get him as either a late guy or a backup, because if that defense can't keep up with that offense, the offense in the NFL like they used to, and Ben's got to throw the ball more and more and rely on Antonio and Bryant and Schuster and Bell, maybe next year is going to be a good time. This year is going to be a good time for Roethlisberger to keep that consistency going, and might be worth a later round draft pick, again, as a backup, and then he might end up being your starter.
Well, and I think that brings up a good point, too, because we talk about, guys that could be volume plays. And when you talk about that, you normally think of skill positions. You think of running backs. You think of receivers. I don't know necessarily if we talk enough about that aspect of it as quarterbacks that are going to be volume plays. You look at guys that have those kind of defenses that aren't going to allow them a lot of time to rest, or you look at a guy that might have a little bit of lack of running game, and it could affect them, one way or the other. It could really affect them to the point where teams are going to really focus on the quarterback more so than the running backs, or it could lead to something where they're going to be playing from behind, and those opportunities are going to be there. And I think that's definitely the case there as well, because he's, like I said, he's got weapons around him. He's got weapons everywhere, and so just from a volume standpoint, the opportunities are going to be there. So I think that's another guy that I might look at, a little bit more so than I would have in the past.
Right. And you want to talk about streaming? This boy is streaming heaven. Since 2015 at home, 26.6 fantasy points a game, 17 of 19 in clutch games for 89%. On the road, 45%. So you want to talk about a streaming. There's your streamer right there. He is perfect if he's playing at home, man.
Yeah, like I said, and you like that too. And the only thing is just with the health. The health is the thing.
Well, that's it. He hasn't
not just his health too, but Antonio Brown as well. If Antonio Brown goes down, I like Juju Smith-Schuster, but there's not a lot of guys that are going to replace that production. Not anybody.
They're talking about, and one good thing I have heard in the offseason is that, and again, this is all hearsay and articles and internet, but that Martavius Bryant has a new attitude, and he's talked with the team, and the team is welcoming him back, and he wants to be a contributor again. And man, if you can get all three of those, Schuster, Bryant, and Brown, on the field at the same time, defenses are going to have their hands full.
Well, you're telling me everything on the internet's not true?
I'm just saying, it's possible.
Oh, okay. All right.
Just on Fox News, because they're fake news. Well, actually, I can say it about CNN now because my daughter doesn't work anymore.
So yeah, so that is a scary trio if you can get anything out
And
of it.
Bell out of the backfield.
Oh,
Yeah.
if you're thinking about too, Martavis Bryant is your wide receiver 3 on that team, possibly. If you're not, and if you're not going into this season, if I'm that coaching staff, I'm kind of treating him with, if we get something out of him, great. If we've heard this before, if he's really committed, that's going to be a bonus for us. And if he really is committed, everything he gives you is just gravy on top of what you already have. So
Right,
that's that.
right.
If that works out for the Steelers, that's going to work out well for guys that draft Ben Roethlisberger also.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so next guy we're looking at here as we go down the list, at first kind of a head scratching move. When you saw this trade go down at the beginning, and a guy that had a full. We talk about the skill position players being around the quarterbacks. Guy that goes from kind of a full kitchen of weapons here to kind of a depleted arsenal of weapons here, and that's Alex Smith, who's going to be headed to Washington. We spoke a little bit about this in the past few weeks. The things that the players he's gonna be having around him to throw to. So, not real high up on the consistency rankings here. It's one of those things that I thought he would be higher when the season ended. When you look at him fourth in total points, but you look at and he's almost kind of the perfect example of what we're doing with the consistency here, because fourth in total points looks great, but at the same time, when you have that fourth in total points and you only have 53% clutch games, that means that you got all your production in a small amount of time. And so, how are you treating Alex Smith next year?
I'm treating him like a redheaded stepchild. There's no way he's going to be on any of my teams. I just, like you said, he was going from a team that was loaded with weapons, and he was very successful in the games he needed to be, and certainly had some huge games this past year. But the problem is that then he'd have a bunch of duds, and hence his 53% consistency. I really feel like he's not going to put up the big games at all in Washington. I just feel like he is going to do the best he can with what he has. I can't imagine him being higher than 50% consistent. And based on that, and we know that the total points is going to have to drop off just because, that team doesn't have. I mean, they have decent weapons. Crowder, Doxson, a healthy Jordan Reed would help. But I just feel like of all the people we've talked about, I just don't see me ever drafting Alex Smith unless it's a 4-quarterback league. And then I still might take Joe Flacco over him. No, I'm just kidding.
I was gonna say, I don't know how many 4-quarterback leagues I played in, but I don't know if he would even. He might be my backup in a 4-quarterback league. Possibly.
Right, exactly. He'll be my QB5.
There you go. That's not a phrase you hear every day, QB5. So as we scroll down a little bit further here, we're starting to get into the land, no man's land here of guys that I hope I don't have to end up drafting. I'll take that back. There's one guy here.
Yeah, I hope we're going to talk about the one guy we did talk about.
Yeah, a little further down on the list here, and that's Case Keenum. And when you look at Case Keenum, I like him going to Denver. I think that's a great move for him. I feel like last year in Minnesota, he always had the coaching staff looking over his shoulder, kind of just looking for an excuse to get him out of there for whatever reason, and he took him to the playoffs. And so, it helped that he had a nice couple wide receivers there as well, had a nice tight end. And I like him just as much going into Denver as I did in Minnesota. And we look at how far down he is on the list. He's the 34th quarterback on this list to pick 176. And yet again, if you're one of those people that's waiting and you want to stream some guys and you want to take your first guy a little bit earlier and wait on him, I think it's a great value here. I like it. What do you say?
I mean,
let me ask you, what do you think about the receivers as far as him meshing with the guys that are there in Denver?
I think the biggest beneficiary of Casey Keenum going to Denver is going to be Emmanuel Sanders. Demaryius Thomas. He's been consistent regardless. Even with the stiffs they've had at quarterback there. I think Thomas will improve some, but last year he still was 69% consistent. He was 15th. He probably will go into the top 12. He'll move up a few spots because of that. From that standpoint, so I'll definitely be moving him up. But Emmanuel Sanders, with those stiffs that they've had at quarterback, like Lynch and Simeon and those kind of guys, just didn't seem to mesh with him. And I remember when I've watched Emmanuel Sanders when like Peyton Manning was there, is Emmanuel Sanders is one of those guys when his quarterback is in trouble, he gets back to the quarterback and makes the necessary adjustments to give the quarterback a chance to make a pass to him. That happened quite a bit with Manning because Manning obviously was not very mobile. Casey Keenum was that kind of quarterback in Minnesota. He made a lot of people miss. He scrambled around the pocket very well, extended plays very well, and with Thielen and Diggs was very good at keeping that offense moving and made that offense very successful. Sanders now gets that kind of quarterback that he likes that will move around the pocket and extend the play so Sanders can help him. I see Sanders benefiting the most out of this scenario. I think Casey Keenum will be a good quarterback. I think he'll be in that 50% range. So, I'm not extremely excited that he's going to be better than he was in Minnesota. I don't know if he'll put up those kind of numbers, but I think he'll be a good, solid quarterback. But I think Emmanuel Sanders is the biggest beneficiary of this in Denver. The other reason I think Keenum is going to struggle maybe a little is another two reasons. One, the offensive line in Denver still needs some rebuilding, and two, their running back situation is still a little messy. C.J. Anderson hasn't been himself in years. Devontae Booker is not that good of a running back. Unless they get a running back in the draft, I think that's going to hurt him because he had a great running game going on, in Minnesota with McKinnon and Murray.
Now, you called Peyton Manning not mobile, and I just want to remind you that Peyton Manning does have a 33-yard touchdown run to his career, and he did that at age 39 as well. So I just want to throw that out there.
Everybody fell down. I think that was during the blackout in that one Super Bowl.
Well, yeah, but if you want to take it out of context, I guess you can. We can.
We can.
He does have that on his resume. So
that's good.
So, guy, as we're kind of ending up here, I'm going to skip down a little bit here, and a guy that, Bob, you're there in Ohio, you're a Browns fan, and so I'm going to give you a chance to talk about your new franchise quarterback here, in Tyrod Taylor, and another move, and we've alluded to this a couple times in the previous weeks, and with all seriousness, I can say this as a Colts fan, I'm really envious of the Browns roster right now when I look at the Colts roster, and I think there's a couple other teams in the league that you could kind of argue that as well, and I think they're doing some things right, and I think they're finally making some moves that make sense. So as we scroll down this list here, at number 30 already, it seemed like we've gone through this pretty quick. Pick 172, you got Tyrod Taylor sitting here, and I know you're not obviously gonna, unless you're just a 100% Cleveland Browns homer, I don't think you're going to take Tyrod Taylor as your QB1, but is Tyrod Taylor a guy that you might consider maybe as a streaming option, and if so, how deep of a league are you looking at him in?
Well, I think it has to be pretty deep. Again, I'm very excited as a Browns fan to have Tyrod Taylor as my quarterback at this point because of what we've had in the past. I think he's certainly going to bring a lot to the game. He's got a lot of weapons around him, Jarvis Landry, Josh Gordon. So I think he's going to do well. I just don't know if he's going to be that fantasy relevant because, again, we just don't know because this is basically a hodgepodge of all these players coming together for the first time in their first season. We don't know what's going to happen. This is not like a New Orleans Saints, which has a team that, last year and has all remained the same, and you know what to expect out of all the players in that realm. These are all guys coming basically to new teams for the first time, new offensive line, new running backs, new quarterbacks, new wide receivers, you name it, new coaches, new offensive coordinators. So I think it's going to take some time to gel. I don't know if Taylor's going to be much of a fantasy aspect, but I wouldn't be surprised also to see games where he could go off for 4 touchdowns. Maybe 1 or 2 rushing and throw for 2 and, in that kind of realm. But I also could see that next week maybe the running game's clicking with Carlos Hyde and Duke Johnson, and he doesn't have to throw as much. It's hard to tell because I've never seen success in Cleveland, so I can't be that optimistic to say he's going to go out and throw 35 touchdowns and be a god. Do I want him to be? Absolutely. But I just feel like, I have that Eeyore dark cloud over my head going, well, maybe he'll be good this year. So we'll see.
One of the things too you got to look at there as well is that when you look at the offensive weapons, there's a lot to like there.
Oh yeah.
Especially wide receiver, Njoku at tight end, but also too I'd be interested to see how Joe Thomas finally retiring impacts that offense as well. One of the best guys to ever do it at that spot.
Right. I mean, they did a nice job of boosting the offensive line after he left. And I'm terrible at offensive line guys. I know they got a guy from Pittsburgh, and they picked up somebody else too, and I can't remember who it was. But both of them were, from what I remember reading, were pretty highly touted as solid draft or solid free agent pickups. So they don't think they're, obviously you can't replace a Joe Thomas. You can only, get somebody that can be close to be. If somebody's going to be 80% as good as Joe Thomas, we're all happy. The key is just keeping a solid offensive line in front of this team because, you've seen these scenarios like the Seahawks and some of these guys who sell their soul for their star players at wide receivers and tight ends and running backs and quarterbacks and have nothing on the offensive line, and it's just a mess. And so I think the Browns have done a decent job of keeping that kind of in check in the offseason by getting some good pickups there. And like I said, I'm excited for Tyrod and Landry. I think it's going to be a great offense. I'm excited to watch it as everybody else is in Northeast Ohio. But we've had those moments before. We'll see what the draft brings us. Offensively, defensively, and see what happens.
Sitting in a nice spot too with all those weapons and the picks there at the top of the draft. Also, I think they've done a nice job of kind of managing, getting rid of some picks for some quality pieces, but also, managing those ones that they have at the top there as well.
Right.
So as we're kind of wrapping up here, we're getting towards the end here. I'm going to kind of flip it a little bit. And at this point, Bob, who's a guy that you have down at this list that sticks out to you? Maybe that you might get something out of if you wait a little bit to this point as maybe a streaming option, maybe a backup. Who's somebody out here that you might get a little bit of value at this point? I know we're kind of getting down to some slim pickings here, but who are you looking at here in this range?
I guess if I'm going to pick somebody, I'd probably look at somebody maybe like Bortles, who put together a decent second half last year and went into the playoffs looking semi-decent. Obviously Nick Foles all the way down at 200 range. There's certainly a lot of speculation that Wentz is not going to start the season. So, if you get Foles late to be, maybe you fill him in for the first 4 weeks, that's certainly some great options. But then there's other guys like Sam Bradford. He actually looked pretty good when he was starting for Minnesota, for those first 5 or 6 games before he got hurt. He's now going to Arizona. He's got Larry Fitzgerald. He's got a lot, some good weapons around him. Jerron Brown, David Johnson in the backfield. So, all these guys have potentials to be decent. It's just that I think all of them are going to fall in that 40-50% consistency range. Again, if you can find, when we get into the year and we get closer, we start breaking down, we'll start pulling out the historical consistency report where we can show that streaming options. Now you got me thinking about putting together some streaming option historical consistency information together for, streaming quarterbacks this upcoming year, especially with some of these older veterans like Roethlisberger and Rivers and Ryan and Breeze and those kind of guys, and showing how maybe once the schedule comes out, we could, show a perfectly consistent quarterback by having 3 different guys or something like that. So I think those options are there. But, and there's a lot of rookies coming out, so we'll see how it all plays out. But I think more importantly, as we've discussed these 2 weeks, is that it's so important to find consistency in these quarterbacks and getting the consistent players, and depending on when you got to draft them. But follow us. The book will come out. We'll break down the quarterbacks even more. But as we get close to the season, we'll certainly fine tune this. But I think more importantly than ever this year, you either got to kind of spend up, kind of like in the daily. You guys that play the DFS, you either got to spend up at quarterback, or you just got to go cheap and pull in some, find some sleepers or find some diamonds in the rough that you can kind of build a good starting quarterback consistency wise. Because I just think there's a lot of question marks at a lot of these QBs that has me a little scared for most of them. So, like you said, either it's get the Aaron Rodgers or the Wentz when he's healthy, or somebody that you can count on, 70 plus consistency percentage, or stream some of these home and away guys to kind of build the perfect beast.
I agree. One of the things I was able to do, and it speaks to, it's a rarity that it's for, as long as we've been playing fantasy, it's hard for me to, you play for so long, you play in so many leagues, it's hard to do something that you've never done before. And this kind of is one of those abnormalities that I've had that was last year that I played in a 2-quarterback league. And it just so happened that I think it's like a 12-team league. So the quarterbacks are gobbled up. And it's one of those things where I ended up having, because of bye weeks, because of guys I didn't want to draft, because of guys that weren't on, there was nobody on waivers. In a 2-quarterback league, I had 0 quarterbacks, and that's a team that I also have Le'Veon Bell and Todd Gurley, and I can't remember who else I have, but whatever week it was, they decided to go off, and I was actually able to win by about 70 points
with no quarterbacks in a 2-quarterback league. That's damn impressive.
Roster. Yeah, and I don't think I could do that again if I tried, but it was just one of those weeks where it clicked. But It speaks to that point, though. You've got to get that position right, and you've got to get it whether it is, like you said, if you're going to spend up. But if you're not, you've really got to get a plan formulated, because that's where the majority of your points are coming from every week, and you're not going to have weeks where everybody is going to go off. And so, you have weeks where you have that quarterback go off. That's going to offset, maybe if you have a running back, and it offsets injuries too. One of the things that we can't predict, and this is something that's killing me in baseball season, I think it's killing everybody, is, you put a guy in, and, if he plays 3-4 plays and then he's out the rest of the game, there's really not a whole lot you're going to do about that. And so you get that quarterback right to kind of give you that big production, to hit those bonuses. I know a lot of people play in leagues where you have point bonuses where they hit 325, 350. You can, if you can get some of those, get a guy with no interceptions, get a guy with 3-4 touchdowns, that's going to be pretty huge for you.
Definitely. So, well, thank you again, Ron. I think hopefully we kind of share with folks this week that there's a lot of values, at least at this point, ADP wise. Like I said, this will shift tremendously after the draft, et cetera, et cetera. We'll certainly revisit all this in June and July when we've got a clear picture ADPs. But I have a feeling that, as I mentioned, that there's going to be a lot of changes, and guys are going up and down in the draft or in these ADPs. But I think this is maybe the year that we really want to look at, not maybe outside of the top 12 for more value than what people will give it. And I think this year, more importantly, is really to focus on the consistency of the quarterbacks and not jump at a Cam Newton because he was third in total points last year, or Alex, obviously not Alex Smith, but those kind of people where they score a lot of points and so they look great on paper, but the consistency is not there, and that's what we're here to help you with. So thank you, Ron, for helping us out again this week, and why don't you tell everybody where they can find you and what you're writing about at Big Guy Fantasy Sports.
We are I'm going to be kind of moving the on deck circle for baseball back, scaling it back a little bit, maybe making it more kind of a monthly thing over there. Once the football season gets started, I don't know, contribute something over there football wise. I'm kind of got the wheels turning now about this streaming stuff, as you said, with the consistency. Yeah. So may want to contribute something like that. But full baseball mode right now. At the same time, you can catch me on Twitter at the Real Made. Anything you want to tweet at me, football, baseball related. You catch me on the Nasty Cast Fantasy Baseball podcast with the trio of myself, Nathan Dawkin, and the Manly Van Lee. We also do the Fantrax Dynasty Pod as well, handling your minor league moves, your prospect call ups. So yeah, that's where you can find me. I'm not a hard man to find.
No, especially baseball season. I know you're all over the place, so definitely look up Ron. Follow him on Twitter. That'd be the easiest because that's where he'll post all of links to his articles. And of course, you can find me at Big Guy Fantasy Sports, doing all the consistency stuff and lots of great stuff coming out. Like I said, we'll be working on some new articles here as we head towards the season, working on getting the guide done so by June 1st everybody can have their award-winning, or at least award-nominated, and Amazon best-selling fantasy football consistency guide. So, again, for Ron, this is Bob Lung, and everybody have a great week. God bless. Take care, and we'll see you next week.